The pick is in.
The Toronto Raptors have made their selection in the 2024 NBA Draft. I'm Kylan Mills. Glad to have you here, joined by Sean Woodley of Locked On Raptors to break down the selection this team made. And this is presented to you by LinkedIn Jobs. They've got candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. With the 19th overall pick, the Raptors select Jacoby Walter, Baylor guard, 6'4", right around 200 pounds, said by a lot of scouts to be a possible 3-and-D type of player. Sean, based on the needs for this Raptors team, what do you think about this pick?
Yeah, when it first came down, I was not like over the moon necessarily because I've just been through this whole draft process looking at the Raptors as a team that needs size. They just traded away this season OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Precious Achiuwa, these 6'8", 6'9" wing types that I think the Raptors now really need to go and find out of their team. And, it's not that the 19th pick was the only way to go and do this. And I do think Jacoby Walter does bring a couple things this Raptors team desperately does need. And I do think just the catch and shoot, the movement 3-point shooting he brings to the table is awesome. I think the combination of his shooting with Grady Dick, the Raptors first round pick from last year, 13th overall, gives the Raptors an infusion of 3-point shooting that they just have not had in a long time. They've been bottom 5 in 3-point percentage and 3-point attempts as far as I can remember now. They just have not been a very good offensive team. They haven't had a ton of 3-point juice around the roster, and I think Walter certainly brings that. And he does have some defensive punch as well. He's got a 6'10" wingspan. He's 6'5", 6'6". He's not as big as your traditional sort of wing stopper, but I do think he profiles as the type of guy that basically every team wants, right? Guys who can defend and shoot threes. That's just the way things are going. I have some questions about what he's going to do as an on-ball player, but the Raptors have Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel quickly for that right now. And so I don't think it's got to be a thing where he's going to be thrust into, creating a whole bunch or anything like that. I think it's a pretty smart pick for the Raptors, and it seems like a pretty good value as well for a guy who seemed like he was maybe projected to go in the lottery.
Jacoby Walter, by the way, 19 years old, and he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Remember hearing about him as one of the top players in that 2023 draft class, or that 2023 graduating class. But you look at a player who's so young. How quickly do you expect him to be able to transition to the NBA and to really impact winning for this team?
I think, as is always the case, it's going to be a learning curve in year one. We saw with Grady Dick this past season. He barely played for the first half of the year and looked like not an NBA player for quite some time. He just didn't have the physical build to hang in the NBA. I do think Jacoby Walter has a more NBA-ready physical makeup. He just looks like a dude who can jump into the NBA and hang with NBA athletes right away. And so I am hopeful that we'll see him get regular bench rotation minutes for this Raptors team going into this year. We'll see whether this indicates anything about their plans with Gary Trent Jr., who's their incumbent starting 2-guard, who I've expected they'll bring back as an unrestricted free agent all along, basically. But Jacoby Walter does, in theory, fill that niche for this team. Obviously, I don't think you should be replacing outgoing veterans with rookies. I don't think that's a way to sort of replace talent like for like or anything like that. But I do think off the bench, there are going to be some minutes for Walter next season. This has not been a deep team at all, and he may not get the first shot at sort of, bench wing rotation minutes. I think Ochai Agbaji, who the Raptors acquired at the trade deadline, probably stands a chance of just sort of getting the shot first as that sort of backup 2-guard. But if things don't go well there, and they did not go well for Ochai Agbaji down the stretch of the season in Toronto, I think there's a real chance we'll see Walter getting regular rotation minutes for the Raptors, 15, 20 minutes a night, something along those lines by about midseason.
Well, you made a point about Walter maybe not being the best creator off the dribble. To me, looking at this Raptors team, you need kind of a playmaker in the backcourt. Is that a piece that you think this team needs to now look to bring in moving forward out of the draft as we look ahead to free agency and trades really starting to spark up? Although we saw a lot of pieces already go. Would you like to see size? Like, what do you think is the next piece that needs to be added?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? They have the 31st pick in this year's draft, which is a fascinating place to be because of the 2-day draft now, right? They're going to have plenty of calls, plenty of offers, I think, for that pick. over the course of the next however many hours. I don't know what time it is or when the next round starts, but they'll have a lot of offers coming in. And maybe that's a way for them to go in and add more of a ready-made backup point guard who I think the Raptors could really use right now as some supplementary playmaking behind Emmanuel Quickly and Scotty Barnes. I also think they could use a third big man. That we saw last year when Jakob Poeltl wasn't available. The Raptors were not a basketball team. They went like 3-30 in the games he wasn't playing. They need a little bit more insulation behind Poeltl. We'll see if maybe that's a guy they can go for at 31, maybe a Kyle Filipowski. Who knows? We're recording now as the first round still going on. So
Yeah.
possible anyone I mentioned is going to be gone and off the board, but maybe they go for a center with their 31st pick. There's also going to be plenty of wing types there, one would think as well. I think there's all sorts of ways they could go, but yeah, definitely a backup point guard at some point this summer, some sort of big help. And I still think a big defensively oriented wing who can shoot. Those are all things the Raptors need. They might not get them all this summer, but this team is about sort of the next 2, 3, 4 years than it is so much about next season. So it doesn't all have to be done over the course of the next week or so, but those are the things they'll certainly be looking for.
All right, Sean, thanks so much for hanging. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Once again, it's Jacoby Walter going 19th overall out of Baylor to the Toronto Raptors. Thanks again.
Baylor has had a player selected in the top 16 of the NBA draft the last 3 years. Jacoby Walter is going to be the fourth. I'm Cam Stewart from Locked On Baylor, and Jacoby Walter had a massive freshman season, averaging 15 points a game and 4 rebounds a game on the way to the Big 12 Freshman of the Year. And with his great shooting ability, and I think that defense is going to develop too, I can see a lot of like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in him, maybe even some Jalen Suggs, who became a much better shooter for the Magic this year. I do see him making an impact for someone next year, maybe a team that is contending for a playoff spot. I could see Jacoby Walter absolutely playing a role for that team. And for more on Walter and all things Baylor, follow and subscribe to Locked On Baylor on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
For more on the Toronto Raptors, be sure to go over to YouTube or look up wherever you get podcasts to find the Locked On Raptors podcast. And for continuing coverage of the 2024 NBA draft, subscribe to Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.